It was another busy day on the island of Sodor. Everyone was hard at work, just as they normally do. But they were even harder at work this time. This was because Gordon had been sent to the works after his fatal accident, so Henry and James had to take up the express. The fact controller had been speaking to the manager of the other railway, and soon Sir Topham Hatt had purchased another engine. The engine's name was Dennis. Yes, that Dennis, the one who didn't want to do his work. And he had to take up Henry's work while he was away. When Dennis found out who Henry was, he was furious. How could he do a big green engine's work, but while he was only a small shunter? But he still set about doing things. He was very lazy and shunted like 1 or 2 trucks at a time. This wasn't the case, however, as he managed to pull Henry's train so spectacularly. He could pull like 2 or 3 trucks at a time. Sometimes, though. But as soon he got tired and bored of this work, and he started to fall asleep. Actually, this was a new thing. Engines could fall asleep while driving, but the problem was that their brakes would turn off, and on top of that, the engines couldn't see ahead. Neither could their drivers, so it was a hard time stopping. Needless to say, after Dennis's latest mishap, Sir Topham Hatt was furious, and he sent Dennis to their shed and told him to stay there. So Dennis was delighted. He slept for so long he could not count the days that went by. But then he was woken by Sir Topham Hatt. "What?" he asked. "If you're going to be like that," replied Sir Topham Hatt, "you're not going to have the best job an engine can get." Well, of course, this didn't involve sleeping. He had to pull a double-header with Percy on the express. Needless to say, the 2 engines weren't happy with pulling the express with each other, or at all in Dennis's favor. But Sir Topham Hatt forced them onto the train. Otherwise, he would have used drastic measures. So they reluctantly did so. So the passengers got in, the guard blew his whistle, and the engines tooted. And they were off. Thomas, Duck, and Oliver were waiting at the station mouth when they saw the 2. "Have fun," laughed Thomas. "Hope you don't blow another piston," chortled Duck. Well, the diesel doesn't weasel his way out, laughed Oliver. Ha 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 ha. Quack, 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 growled Dennis, and the two moved on. Then they passed Henry, who had gone red in the face from pulling a long goods train to England and back. Dennis was worried. "All right, Henry?" he asked. Henry took a while to answer. "Not very good," he huffed. But Dennis had stopped worrying about pulling Henry's goods trains, as he was starting to splutter and shake and smoke started pouring out. So Percy and his driver put on the brakes, and both of them came to a standstill inside Henry's tunnel. Just before, James was waiting in the siding outside Henry's tunnel. He was feeling unhappy that he couldn't pull the express, but that was because he had to pull a goods train. So he was waiting to see who was going to come by with the express this time. To his surprise, Dennis had stopped right outside the tunnel. "Hello, Dennis. Have you stopped already?" laughed James. "You better move. The express is coming." "We are pulling the express," said Dennis. "We?" said James. He was shocked. There wasn't any we pulling the express since Percy and Thomas and Duck. Percy had tried to pull the express on his own, but he couldn't do it. "Not much hope. Percy can't pull the train on his own," said James, so he backed up to the express. James was coupled on, and then with a toot of the whistle, he was off, with him at front, the dead Dennis in the middle, and Percy pushing with all his might. The passengers cheered at their savior as they puffed up Gordon's Hill. When they arrived at the last station, everyone got off and waited for another engine to arrive as James pushed Dennis all the way to the diesel works. But when he arrived back at the station, James wasn't welcomed warmly. "Where were you?" cried Sir Topham Hatt. "You were meant to be at the docks ages ago. The important goods train we had contracted for ages hasn't arrived at the other railway." "But, sir," cried James, "I had to save the express." "But no buts," yelled Sir Topham Hatt. "You shall go to the shed and stay there until further notice." James puffed sadly away, leaving a befuddled Percy behind. He was determined to save James from his misery.